So the agenda for today, RCS timeline, RCS challenges, and the status in Denmark. I'm actually Swedish, but I'm representing Denmark here today. Then I'll hand over to Anders, who will talk about the challenges and the status in Sweden. And last but not least, we have a nice company here from the UK. Rob will talk about learnings from outside of the Nordics, especially the UK. I'm not applying for a job, not yet at least. We're actually, we were recently bought by a somewhat shady company, so who knows? I might actually apply for a job, but I hope not. The reason why I show this is because I've worked with RCS. It's kind of been my friend for a long time. So first at Sony Ericsson, I worked with RCS, and then I was at Sinch, did the same thing, and now I moved to Nuuday, and my goal is to introduce RCS in Denmark ASAP. It's a little slower than I expected. Simon sits here. He asked me before I was gonna start, how long does it take before we can launch? I said, 1 month, maybe. And that was a year ago, so yeah. It moves a little slow in this industry, for sure. And here's the little timeline. It's my timeline, so it's not the fact, potentially, but RCS has been around for a long time, you know. It started in 2007 as just a specification, really. And that was at the time when Apple announced their iPhone. Apple was a little quicker with iMessage. In the meantime, GSMA was talking about, with all the operators and MNOs, trying to do something that worked for everyone. And they kept talking, and nothing really happened until Google acquired Jibe. And a little while later, it worked on all Android phones. But that was not enough to rule the world, of course, because we have this guy. While I was working at Sony, initially when they launched their phone, we said they're gonna be a minor player. And I see a lot of iPhones here, obviously. So they ended up being a huge player, and they don't care about operators. We know that. They work on their own. So only Android, that doesn't really help. And it's kind of strange, but China has helped us here. They in 2023, they said that all 5G phones sold in China from 2024 needs RCS. So what does Apple do? They announced that they will support RCS, and in iOS 18 they actually did. So that sounds great, but unfortunately in the meantime we have WhatsApp. Unfortunately I say because I work for an MNO, that doesn't really help us. It's an OTT service. We're not gonna make money on WhatsApp. And they're growing enormously, and they're lowering their prices, as we've heard also. So the main topic for this session here is how can we handle the verification, and how can we ease that? And here, these are screenshots from my time at Sinch, actually. H&M, we all know it, hopefully, a huge Swedish company. You see in the middle here, verified by, someone mentioned Google, that's not good enough. We want it to be your MNO, Nuuday, Telenor, Telia, whatever. And that means it's gonna take time from someone at this MNO. And we don't want to work more than we need to, of course, so we need to do something about this process. And for these big companies, I'm not really worried because there are not so many. But imagine when we come to small brands, like your local dentist or your taxi in your small little town in Sweden. It's gonna be enormous amount of work and so many verifications. Germany, they have started, at least, and that's what we do here today. I think it's really good. We collaborate. We're, of course, competitors, but we collaborate. And in this area, it really makes sense to collaborate because it's all about reach. If just one operator does this, doesn't matter. All the operators in the country needs to do it. And I represent the biggest operator in Denmark, but even if it's just us, that's not good enough. Germany, they're collaborating. They have this webpage, and it's about, someone else mentioned that what do you do to market this, and they're trying to do it somehow, but still they haven't really found a way to make it a smooth process when it comes to onboarding. My last slide before I hand over to Anders. Very short, the RCS status in Denmark. We have 3 operators on the left here. We are very much aligned. Actually, Telia, who recently was sold to Nordics, they're also on board, but they are focusing on the new company. So they have said that 2026 they will focus on this. But the rest of us, we just want it to be out as soon as possible. And we're doing our best, and hopefully it will be at least launched early 2026. That's my goal. That's our goal. And Anders, some more nice...
Well, you said, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
So basically you said that you are the largest operator in Denmark.
And the best, I didn't say, but...
But I also have to say that 3 was the first one launching RBM in Denmark.
Yes.
And we are still the only one actually supporting this. The funny thing is since I represent both Sweden and Denmark, I try to align these markets. And I think that we found an alignment through the Björck collaboration that we've been doing with Nuuday and of course the rest of the operators in Denmark as well. But considering that the largest player in Denmark is extremely eager to get this, system up and running, it helps drive the business, which I really appreciate. In Sweden, I would say I say we for Denmark as well, but in Sweden we are a little bit ahead. I think it's more because we are extremely tight, all the 4 big players in Sweden working together, collaborating with some transparency. Of course, you can't be too transparent when it comes to talking about agreements with especially Apple. You can't, of course, discuss time plans in extreme details. But I think that the plan right now for the Swedish operators is that RBM should be up and running for both iOS and Android in the beginning of next year. I think that's a time plan that has been moved so many times because of quite a lot of constraints that are actually outside of RBM. But I mean, again, as Henrik said, penetration is key here. Everyone needs to be on board, otherwise this will never fly. And at the same time, I have to say that since we launched in both Sweden and Denmark, since I landed in Oslo yesterday, I received, I think, 10 emails from RBM support. So basically agents that are being created in both Sweden and Denmark by our fellow enterprise aggregator colleagues, which I love. The problem is that the whole process is kind of cumbersome because I receive these emails. I have to log in with one Danish account on Google, and I have to log in with one Swedish account on Google, and I have to approve the agents myself. I'm heading the business for both Sweden and Denmark. I don't mind doing this. I don't mind being extremely working on operations, but the whole process itself is extremely cumbersome. I mean, if I've approved Twilio or Infobip or Sinch or Link as an aggregator, I think that, I mean, the whole onboarding, the process, accepting their campaigns should be like streamlined. I shouldn't have to approve each and every agent. That's one of the things that is kind of teasing me a little bit on way of working, where we're introducing new technology, but just going backwards in time, like 10 years. But again, I mean, it's picking up pace. It's going to be a lot of transitions. It's going to be improved, but I think that we need to jointly drive this towards, of course, ourselves and the markets, but also via Google and the Jive platform to actually make this more effective or efficient than it is. I'm not sure, is there anything else I need to mention on this?
I think you mentioned it all. Yeah.
Okay, good. But yet again, we're the first one in Denmark. Don't forget that. So.
Yeah, and we're the biggest one. Don't forget that. Yeah.
We're soon the second biggest one.
Yeah. And
yeah, thank you. So nothing like some healthy competition there.
Oh, of course. We're all friends.
Yeah.
So by way of introduction, I formerly worked at the biggest network in the UK. So I used to work for EE until the summer. I thought that I'd spend a long time in RBM until I saw your timeline there. So I was 18 years in BT, which owns the EE network, 10 years in messaging, and probably 7 years in RBM. So not a patch on where you've come from, Henrik. So by way of introduction, I left BT in the summer, moved across to a small MNO in the UK called Stour, where we've been building a solution for onboarding brands at scale. So Anders set the scene really well there, I guess, for us. And there's two things I'm really passionate about, one being security and the other being rich messaging. So RBM and onboarding is kind of my bag. And within BT, we spent a lot of time being an English-speaking country tackling fraudsters. And we took that to the extreme, I guess, compared to some networks. I had two people that sat in my team specifically. I used to describe them as they come to work, they open up their laptop, and all they do is SMS security. And we used to go all the way down. So when we saw somebody that was engaging in fraud, we would hunt them down, basically. We would use open source information on the internet. We would track SIM cards. We would even get CCTV footage from stores. And in the last year before I left, we arrested 14 people. So we used to work with a part of the Metropolitan Police. Thank you. That could be the highlight of what I'm going to tell you today.
Yeah.
But we used to work with a part of the Metropolitan Police called DCPCU. They specialised in fraud. And what we quickly realised, actually, was that if we used to kind of say we'd bundle some information up, put a bow tie on it and hand it across. And we had some friendly police officers there that we were doing their job for them. So we'd kind of say, this is what they did, and this is where they are, and this is their address. We'd hand that over. They'd go kick down the door, and they'd inevitably find that they weren't just engaged in SMS smishing. There was drugs, knives, guns, money. It's part of a bigger operation. And the longest sentence that one of those people had was 4.5 years. So it was it's something that I was really passionate about, and I kind of carried that, I guess, into RBM. So I'm here to tell you a little bit about the UK market and hopefully to offer some advice as you move into RBM yourselves. BT, the network I work for, that represents EE, we signed our RBM contract, or RBM has been live on our network for 5 years. We actually started negotiations with Google 7 years ago, so it took a little while, as I can hear people in the room saying, to kind of get there. It's been a painful journey, and hopefully you won't all experience that now, but the UK initially started off with 3 different platforms. So Vodafone built its own platform. So Vodafone was on its own platform. O2 was on Mavenir, and we were the first network to go with Google. So when you talk about the operational challenges of onboarding, the aggregators in the UK were connecting to 3 different networks in 3 different ways. It was really fragmented and really painful, and it's taken a long time to get there. Very much like the Nordics, it sounds that we have branded single and conversational messaging, but the journey kind of continues. So EE only went live on Apple officially on the 12th of May. So you do have RBM across both Apple and Android handsets, but we still have Vodafone. Somewhat distracted, I guess. There's been a merger going on in the UK between 3 and Vodafone. They're not live on iOS yet, so there's still a little bit of the UK that hasn't got iOS live. However, it feels like, and I guess one of the things that always used to frustrate me was going to MWC, and everybody would say, this is the year of RCS. This is the year that RBM becomes successful. The stat, so 2 days after the 12th of May, the 14th of May, there was a really big campaign run by one of the aggregators, and they got 60% penetration of RBM. So we have 80% penetration of WhatsApp, so we're not quite there, but we could get up in the UK to 90 to 95% penetration once all of them iOS handsets are updated and live on RBM. So I think we still have an opportunity to kind of take on WhatsApp. The reason I left well, one of the reasons was they were trying to get me back in the office, to be honest, and that gave me the opportunity to take redundancy. So they were trying to get me back in the office I never was in. So I took the opportunity to kind of leave. And what I wanted to do was to kind of help on this journey of onboarding brands. The operational challenges I saw, and Anders spoke about them there, really is in the UK at the moment, the networks are onboarding about 150 brands a month. Doesn't sound like a huge number, but actually when that's on top of your day job, and the networks haven't generally set up operational teams for this, so it's product managers and things like that that are kind of diving in, getting this done as incremental, and it's really painful, I guess, is what I saw, and that's tiny. So in the UK, if you look across the brands that are using SMS, you see about 200,000 sender IDs a day coming across the networks typically. And the stat I always say to people is, what's coming your way? If just 10% of those brands move, or even just use then, I guess, RBM, you'd be seeing 80 brands a day needing validating. And I'd suggest if 10% of brands start using RBM, that's not really a success, right? So you need to be looking at least 25% within a year for me in the UK before that becomes a success. So a little bit of scene set in there. What are the common pain points? If you speak to well, it's painful for everybody. I think that's the overwhelming theme. So if you speak to the networks, about 80% of the validations they get in, they send straight back to an aggregator because there's some missing information, something's in the wrong box. If you speak to an aggregator, one of the aggregators quoted me as saying, "I've never had a single RBM agent which has been approved across all networks." Because the networks behind the scenes have slightly different rules. So they do have one cross MNO form, it's called in the UK, which is for a single point of entry in the process, but behind the scenes it goes into 4 different processes and 4 different timelines within the networks, and some networks better than others. So yeah, it's a painful experience for everybody involved. And I guess that my background originally was security. So when I say networks lack KYB, KYC experience, as networks, if you're specializing in A2P, you don't really know what does good onboarding look like. What are the things I should be testing for? And I get kind of frustrated actually because I talk to some networks and they're asking for pieces of information I would suggest are pointless, and then missing things like asking for the company's address. So how are you doing a KYB check on a company if you're not even asking for the address of the business? So there's very different approaches to onboarding going on. And there's one network I spoke to recently that I asked them what they were doing, and they just said, "If I'm honest, Rob, I leave it 3 or 4 days. I figure somebody's done a better job of me, and then I click the button." And that might sound shocking, right? But the reality is, I worked in a network where I had a team of 17 people covering A2P, and we did enterprise as well. So most people were on the enterprise side of the business, but we were a well-resourced network. There are some networks where you've got one person looking after A2P, and in one network, that person also looks after kind of government business. This isn't a big part of somebody's role quite often. So to expect them to really know how to onboard a brand and probably to do it themselves, I understand why this is happening, but at the same time, it really worries me that we have an opportunity to learn the lessons of the past in SMS, and to just be kind of clicking buttons from an RBM perspective is really dangerous, because the last thing we want really is that trust in the shield of RBM is lost because we start to see smishing on RBM. The other thing that is a particular challenge, and you put a load of brands up on the screen there, Henrik. It's relatively easy, and there's not too much risk at the moment when you're onboarding government departments, big brands, probably recognizable brands that you'd know, your McDonald's and Couriers and stuff like that. But it's not just about brands. So you have TikTok influencers and YouTube stars that might want to use this channel. We've already seen them within the UK. Government departments are harder to validate because you can't just look at the company's house register. And then you have things like music bands. So how do I know that music band is who they say they are? And then at the other end of the scale, you have small businesses. So if I want to go on Companies House in the UK, yes, I can check the limited companies and the medium-sized organizations. But when I look at the smallest organizations, that might just be a plumber, an electrician, somebody like myself that set up a business. How do you validate those? And that's where the most risk becomes, because it's quite easy to just go set up a business, a website, and that's where your fraud comes into this channel. I think the other thing from a brand and an aggregator perspective as well is that pain of inconsistent rules. And I think the reality, the way I quite often describe it is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow is getting to talk to the brands and to talk about the amazing things that they can do with RBM, the great use cases. But you've got this friction in the middle, which is getting the brands on board. Outsourcing that, getting rid of that pain and just getting to talk to the brands, to do webinars, to do events like this. That's kind of the cool stuff, if I'm honest. So it's important, but it's actually not something a lot of people want to get into the detail of. So what do we see in the works? Aligning networks around one validation approach, and that's one of the things I've been working on in the UK. It can be hard to get networks to collaborate. Even when networks get on really well, they might all have slightly different opinions on what this looks like. So going in there, advising on what best practice looks like, what should you be caring about, what are the questions that you might be interested in knowing, but actually is it relevant? And some of these things are harder for brands to answer. Automating checks. So the way that we're doing it is we do a KYB check at the top. And we're kind of saying, what kind of business are they? And if they're a business, it's relatively easy to validate them. As you get down into them smaller businesses where the biggest risk is, in the UK, for example, you can set up as a company. It takes you 24 hours and it costs £50. And I can be a limited company in the UK in 24 hours. And if you're not a limited company, that's even more difficult. So what we're doing is doing KYB checks. So we send an email to the person at the brand, the representative, and we ask them to show their passport to do a liveness check. We're validating them as an individual and saying that you're now responsible for this within your company. And what you'll start to find very quickly is if fraudsters start to enter this channel, if you suddenly ask them for their name, their address, and a picture, they kind of go, I'm probably going to go and start messing around in email or another channel. That makes them uncomfortable, and that's the way to kind of push them out of this channel. And then open source. So again, if you're engaging in fraud, what fraudsters tend to do is they set up a fake Facebook page and they probably set up an email address. So we pull in 500 different pieces of information and we look at when's the first time that email was seen on the internet. Has it ever been involved in a data breach? Does that phone look as if it's been around for a number of years? And that digital footprint is really hard to fake. So we attribute risk scores to that. One of the other things we've talked to the networks about as well is not to be so arbitrary. Some of this isn't a pass-fail, and you can be harder in the beginning, but actually looking at this like a credit check, a risk score, is quite a good way of looking at it. And probably the best example I can give you is some networks are somewhat obsessed, if I'm honest, with things like the privacy policy, because it's one of the things that Google pulls through for an agent. So we're able to go into a lot of detail. We can do a number of checks on a privacy policy, and we can see, does it mention GDPR? Does it do this? There are 5 points that we check. Is the company name in there that they just use a generic one off the internet? If you say it needs to pass all 7 of these checks to be a pass or a fail, you'll find a lot of privacy policies fail, because one of the checks would be, is it within the last year? That's kind of best practice. But actually you want to look at the digital maturity of that business and say, you know what, most of that detail there, it's clearly theirs. And I would argue as networks, who are we to go back to a big business and say, well, actually, I know what your lawyers say, but we don't think your privacy policy is fit for purpose. Because the challenge is, if you go back into a big organization and say, you failed our RBM onboarding process because of your privacy policy, that person's going to go, I have no way how I'm going to change that privacy policy in my large organization. They don't know where it sits. They don't know how it works. They're not going to go argue with the lawyers. So some of this stuff, you have to take a slightly different approach rather than just a pass-fail. Given aggregators, so we say 80% of the information coming in is in the wrong format, but actually have we given them the tools to do it properly? So if you're filling in a form that has no validation on it, no little explainers as to what is on there, that's a bit of a nightmare for them. So it's not a surprise really that the information that's coming in is of poor quality. And actually what you're starting to see, certainly a couple of the aggregators in the UK now, have built systems. They're API connected. So rather than expecting them to take that out of their system to manually type that into a form, we take the information in by API and it becomes an end-to-end process. So API from the aggregator into us, we make the decision, and then we approve that by API straight into Google's console. So it becomes an end-to-end process, and that's minutes rather than days, and coordinate that across networks as well. I guess the final point on this is that there are two distinct models emerging. I personally quite like the model of one single validation body within a country, because you're then able to get consistency across the networks and consistency across the aggregators and brands. What you do see, such as in the US, is a token-based system as well, where they've approved a number of different validation bodies. So there's 3 or 4, and they're saying you can choose where you want to go to get your validation done. So the brand can go to a number of companies and do that, and then they come back to the network with a token, and that token is what is going to put into the system. So there are two distinct models developing. And then thoughts for the Nordics. It was really great to hear that you're already doing some, have an SMS registry. You're clearly working together, and I think that's really nice to see. I think time is of the essence, though, and I hear a lot of people kind of saying, you know what, and we said this, right, in EE, we're like, it's a nice problem to have when validations get so big, we need to go and look for a solution. But I think learn from what you're seeing in other countries. And Anders is already in the pain, unfortunately, but I would argue there's no reason to be launching with a manual process today. Learn from what the other countries are doing, launch with a validation process. And I think what you'll see in the Nordics is that the volume will increase quickly, because RCS is becoming a more popular technology with companies. They'll already understand it from other countries. I also think that you've got WhatsApp, so the bar is set. WhatsApp has a single global validation process, so you have to get to a process where at least you have consistency within a country, if not a region, and that's acceptable, I think, from a brand perspective. And you'll probably have seen as well, and I had a quick look before we started this, WhatsApp is changing their pricing on the 1st of July. I can see that they're reducing pricing in the Nordics by up to 50%, so you've got some real strong competition coming as well. The other thing that we focused on a lot within the UK is making sure we're proactive. And I do think the Nordics are doing that anyway. There are countries that aren't dealing with this well, and that's just meant that the regulators have come in and they've said things like no URLs in messages, and that really destroys the ability for the value within SMS. And touching on it again, collaboration. What you tend to find as well is that you'll have the product manager will start to think about this process, and as the snowball gets bigger, there are a lot more stakeholders that want to get involved. So you have legal and regulatory, you're writing policies. And that's one of the challenges that we've had in the UK, actually, is that the networks have actually been working on an onboarding solution for over a year. They did an RFI over a year ago, but they haven't been able to go out to market with an RFP, because what they found was as soon as the legal team got involved, they're like, oh, this is kind of on the fringes of commercial. I don't know how you can go out as a body of networks to choose one validation body. So I see in some countries like France, where they have the A2FM, where they already have a body that allows them to go to market together. So I guess don't wait until you're a year down the line to start thinking of these things, because they can be probably not something you wouldn't expect, but they can be a lot harder than you would expect. And then I guess I'll just leave it on this one. So trust is the foundation of RBM. The faster a brand is onboarded, the faster your market grows, but only if trust keeps pace. And it's that's the bit I'm most passionate about, really, is please don't just click buttons and let brands on. Don't risk this ecosystem where we've built or has the ability to be a trusted channel. Think about these things early. And that's me. I think it's questions now, is it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
I've got one question. I didn't obviously see how the brand assured solution works, but the thing that just front of mind, even though it's going to enable better verification, does it further slow the process down because there's not extra checks going into place now?
Yeah, so I guess the one thing I kind of hate is selling, if I'm honest. So kind of come in here and kind of pitch in systems and stuff like that. So if somebody wants to see it working, more than happy to give that. No, quite the opposite, actually. So fully end-to-end automated via API. We're able to validate a brand in minutes. What we are doing in the UK, and it'll be different in different countries is we go to the brand as well, and we say, we've received a request to be validate or for Cinch to look after your RBM messaging. So the delay becomes we send that email out and the brand has to click a button. It's like an e-sign type thing within an email. That can take anything up to kind of 3, 4, 5 days. Some brands just click the button, it happens really quickly. But the actual process is like a credit check. So if you imagine the experience you go through when you get a credit card or something, it's an experience very much like that.
Good. Rob didn't pay me to ask that question, by the way. But,
You're just curious.
I was, yeah. It was just I've personally been through I've been through the WABA onboarding experience, which personally they're not in the room. I can say this: it's 10 times worse than RCS, and RCS was bad.
I think when you talk to people, everybody you talk to that is in any way involved in the onboarding process, you can just see the pain in their face.
Yeah.
They're like, this is so much more painful than it needs to be. And I think aggregators going to blame networks and networks blame aggregators. And actually, it's painful for everyone.
Yeah. So one area that really does need fixing. We've got a question here, Martika.
Very short one. So it's a one-time verification?
It's an annual revalidation. So it's up to the networks what they want to do. But in the UK, it's an onboarding validation and then 12 months later, a revalidation.
Okay, but so if this company is sold or given to someone else, so there's nothing...
Yeah, there's ongoing monitoring. So we monitor ongoing. And again, it's up to networks what they want to monitor because there's a cost to some of that. But we scan websites proactively. So depending on the risk score, we could check a website every day, every week if we wanted. We're more likely checking them once a month and just saying, because what you tend to find as well is that the business that onboarded could become fraudulent over time. So if you're doing use case monitoring, for example, you might say no gambling, no cryptocurrency, whatever that might be. So when we onboard, you check that they meet the requirements, but we can check then a month later through AI that they didn't suddenly become a cryptocurrency website or the business changed. It's that kind of sets off an alert, yeah.
Thanks. We have another question? Hassan?
Yes, is it working? Very good presentation, really insightful, first of all. Thank you for that. I was thinking we all went through quite a big migration a few years ago in the US when the LVNs changed to 10DLC and then eventually the TFN registrations and so on. So some of the processes, for example, the registration of the brand and the registration of the campaign and so on, I mean, it looks quite similar. So I was just thinking, are there any similarities between the RBM agent registration and what we went through in the US? And are there any learnings? So has anyone studied that in any way?
Yeah, I've read a lot of the CTI guidelines, and I guess that's what we wanted to do was to learn best practice, look at other countries where validation is in place. If I'm really honest, when I look at the US market, because the US has been doing certainly SMS validation, 10DLC for a number of years, it's really complicated. There's vetting, there's enhanced vetting, there's registration, there's all of these processes. And I think what's happened over time is through polluted databases, you've ended up with one company checking another company's homework, quite convoluted processes going on. So I would certainly say we should and do look to the US to learn lessons. But at the same time, I don't think it needs to be perhaps as complicated as some of the markets are out there. We've tried to simplify it, automate it, and the reality is, I think what we're doing today, we probably couldn't have done a year ago, certainly 2 years ago. The availability of AI has revolutionized some of this stuff. The ability to check businesses and to scan an entire privacy policy on a website and to summarize that. My colleagues in E a year ago literally reading through a privacy policy, and privacy policies are always really long. So they're reading through it and trying to decide whether there's a good policy. And I'm just looking at it. I just don't know why we're doing this. It's crazy, right? So, Björck in a smaller company where we're focused on tech development, the ability for AI to read a privacy policy, do a 7-point check on it. It's like 5 seconds. So yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that we can do now to make this robust. And all the time we're looking for proxies for fraud. So just because somebody has an out-of-date privacy policy doesn't mean they're necessarily fraudulent, but you're looking at that as the overall picture. It's one of the indicators. So everything we're doing is, what does that tell us about this business?
Thanks. Henrik, Anders, any closing points? There doesn't have to be.
No, I mean the main thing here was Rob actually. We introduced the settings basically, and we see the issues, and this is one of the potential solutions.
Yeah.
And just like you said, Rob, I think it makes sense to have the same kind of process per country at least.
Yeah.
I think all the aggregators agree. It's a pain if all the operators have different processes, and we just want it to be smooth and painless.
I think it's a shame to put all the work into getting RBM live and then have such a poor onboarding experience from the aggregators to a degree. That's why the argument is that the aggregators exist to take complexity away. The business exists because every network does SMS slightly different, and then you multiply that over many networks in many countries. But actually, there's no reason that RBM onboarding needs to be difficult, and actually showing that to that's the one thing I think I find the most disappointment in is sharing our complexity with brands. We should never show brands, even if we as an industry, and I've certainly been in conferences where there's going to be brands and aggregators in the room, and we've shared, I think, too much complexity with the brands. We need to do everything we can so that whatever's going on behind the scenes, it looks slick from a brand perspective.
Yeah.
Anders, all good? All good. Any other
He's
questions?
got 10 emails to go click buttons off.
Yeah. Anders wants this solution in. Well, I'm glad I didn't have to come on stage earlier and sit between you two guys. I think it was friendly banter, right?